And we're on.
Well, welcome everyone from up top to down under. We're not talking 6 feet down under, but we have lots of viewers in New Zealand and Australia, and also up north in the Northwest Territories and Yukon. And today, a very, very special guest, Dr. David Gorski, who is a professor of surgery at Wayne State University. It's in Detroit, and is also managing editor of Science-Based Medicine, which is the website to go to whenever you have any kind of medical question. It is just outstanding. And I would say the only other website to go to is ours. But besides that,
Of
go to
course.
Science-Based Medicine. All right, behind the scenes, manning the microphone and with her earphones firmly plugged into her ears is Emily Shore, who will be monitoring the calls and making sure everything goes smoothly here. And also joining us today is my colleague Jonathan Jerry, who, of course, you know from all of our other webcasts. And we have entitled this Conversations about COVID-19 and More. But we always start with COVID-19 because
You kind of have to.
So, David, how has your practice changed within the last 2 months? What has been happening?
Well, back in March when things started getting, when the warning signs in Detroit were, there and the preparations were begun, like as in many other places, hospitals started delaying or deferring what quote unquote non-essential surgery. The thing is, though, cancer surgery is never quite non-essential. So there was, a whole debate over which of our surgeries we could manage to delay and which ones we could not. It turns out that, for instance, with a lot of breast cancer, you could, the estrogen responsive breast cancer, for instance, it's safe to put a woman on an estrogen blocking drug for several weeks or a couple of months and thereby delay the surgery that way, which has become part of our practice. We do a lot more neoadjuvant chemotherapy, which is the chemotherapy first, and then the surgery after that. But in the month of April was, fairly brutal in terms of like the case numbers, and we really, I did very little surgery in April, and only now in the last 2 or 3 weeks are things starting to pick up and get a little bit more looking like normal, although we're still not there yet.
What about your daily life outside of the hospital? How much has that been affected?
Well, like a lot of other people, on days when I'm not in the clinic or in the operating room, I pretty much stayed home and I would work on grants and papers, from my home office. So, I mean, I'm sure it's an experience a lot of people have had, and that's basically it. I'm only going in about 2 or 3 days a week right now.
Well, the amount of blogging that you do, I don't know how on earth you do that. You produce these monumental posts on a daily basis.
Oddly enough, my blogging is decreased over the last couple of months. It's like I went from nearly every day to like only 2 or 3 times a week, and I can't quite figure out why.
Well, I think most of us are getting a little bit dragged down with COVID.
That may be it, yeah.
Talking about it, I mean, that's all you can do. But anyway, we do have to talk about it. And I know that, I mean, one of your specialties, of course, is debunking all the nonsense that is out there. And there's an ever-increasing amount. What is currently on your landscape that you think really needs to be countered?
Oh, where to start?
Pandemic, surely.
Well, but pandemic is already yesterday's news. But yeah, that's a good one. There's the amount of misinformation they packed into that 26-minute video is, truly epic. It's and man, I will have to give Judy Mikovits, the disgraced scientist, I should say, who was featured there in that video, credit for like real cunning and like managing to rope herself into the Anthony Fauci conspiracy theories and, get attention that way.
Now, the anti-vaxxers, of course, are still at it, and Jonathan has been looking into this. And so, Jonathan, maybe you want to bring up some of this stuff that you've been investigating.
Yeah. So today I was doing dual duty as I was finishing up my article on where is the anti-vaccine movement now in 2020, because there are some interesting ties with the anti-lockdown movement,
yes,
which
there are.
David is familiar with, especially in his home state of Michigan. But I was also watching the Autism One virtual conference because they switched to the online version of it.
I have not done that.
Yeah, so that was interesting. My brain is still in recovery mode because their keynote speaker was, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr., who is a very prominent voice in the anti-vaccination movement. And he went on. His keynote, it was very interesting because his keynote was pre-recorded. They had two cameras on him. They pre-packaged the whole thing and they streamed it. And he went on for over an hour, and it was very much of a Gish Gallop, which is named after Dwayne Gish, who was a famous creationist. It's basically fire hosing. So you just go through a number of claims, one after the next, after the next, to the point where you on the other side you can't address all of them. There's just so much being. I mean, it's a little bit like pandemic, and so he went after Fauci and he went after Bill Gates. And his theory, I mean, the question that he's asking, he's not making strong assertions, but he's asking the question.
He's jacking off.
Yes, exactly. JAQ, just asking questions. And what he's saying is basically that he thinks, maybe we're asking questions here, that Anthony Fauci was financing what is called gain-of-function research. So this is when researchers are trying to induce mutations in viruses in the lab that will give them an additional function, will be beneficial to the virus. And that can help them sort of figure out where a virus might drift into and how to protect ourselves and vaccines, all that kind of stuff. So he's asking the question whether Anthony Fauci was financing gain-of-function mutations in coronaviruses in Wuhan, China, using Bill Gates's money. And that super virus that he financed got out of the laboratory. And that's what we're dealing with now. So that's the narrative that he was asking questions about. That was sort of the focus of his talk.
Is that where all the Bill Gates stuff comes into play?
Well, different people have different theories about Bill Gates' involvement.
But this happens with every epidemic or pandemic. They claim it's a bioweapon or some sort of weaponized virus. It happened with the H1N1 pandemic. It happened with the Ebola outbreaks. It happened with Zika virus. It happens this is one of the core conspiracy theories that comes around whenever there's any sort of major outbreak.
What I find interesting, though, is the Bill Gates connection. Of all people to drag into the mud in this fashion, someone who has donated so much and has made such contributions to society, to spew this nonsensical venom at him is just inexcusable.
He's being a staunch proponent of vaccination and public health, plus being a billionaire, plus donating 90% of your wealth to causes to address these public health and develop vaccines, and he's not just into vaccines. Their foundation funds a lot more than just vaccines, but the anti-vaxxers fixate on the vaccines, of course.
And also he comes from tech. And so what they're roping into that is this idea that he wants to monitor all of our movements. And he has ties to 5G, and 5G technology is going to be spying on us. And maybe the vaccine that they're developing will have a microchip inside of it, and it's going to get us tagged so that they can trace us. So all of these things sort of get stirred into this big pot. And it's quite baffling in a sense, but also that's kind of how the human brain is at its worst.
It's also exhausting.
It is, yeah.
I mean,
So I was exhausted after finishing all
yeah,
this.
there's
stuff
so much
No, no.
effort to have to think about all of that.
So you're saying I should watch this, or it just drive me so crazy that I can't?
You
Well,
might want to avert your eyes. You might want to stay away
yeah,
I
from
mean,
this one.
chloroquine
because
story has been
because
resuscitated this week. We thought
I
that
mean,
it had been put to death, but it was resuscitated. Now, the fact that Trump is taking it, it's a prescription drug. So he was prescribed it by his White House physicians.
presumably that had to have happened.
Everyone is blaming Trump. And of course, he deserves to be blamed for everything. But what about blaming his physicians who went along with this?
Oh, his doctor's a quack. What can you say? It's just, I mean, the whole hydroxychloroquine story is a really bizarre one. The French scientist who sort of got the ball rolling, Didier Raoult. I think that's how it's pronounced. My French is horrible these days. I actually used to speak pretty good French 30 years ago, but you don't use it, you lose it. And in any case, he locked onto the idea of hydroxychloroquine. A lot of people don't know the origin of where that came from. It came on the basis of the thinnest of data or evidence that you can imagine. Basically, back in January, a group of Chinese researchers, I don't know if it was through confirmation bias or what, claimed to have noticed that their patients with autoimmune diseases taking chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine did not get the coronavirus. And so they started, doing clinical trial. There were clinical trials registered. There were case reports made, an anecdotal case series. And by February, they were saying that the results were positive in randomized trials, but none of them were published. And the Chinese government issued basically, recommendations on how to treat COVID. And in those recommendations was the use of hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine as though they had been proven to work, even though nothing had been published. And you're basically taking their word for it, that the clinical trials were positive or that the anecdotal evidence was promising. Raoult somehow picked up on that and ran with it. And then he did that really horrible first study that you may have looked at, of claiming the 100% virus clearance with his combination of azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine. Now, where the azithromycin came from, I'm still to this day not entirely sure. I think they chose it because it's also thought to have some antiviral activity, and if they were choosing it for patients whom they thought had a superimposed bacterial pneumonia, and so they were using it. I think that's what was going on, but I'm still not 100% sure to this day. In any event, that paper was terrible. It was rightly savaged. Then he published a case series, no control. It was just, it was a single arm clinical study claiming, great success when there was no way to tell if his reported, case fatality rates and, recovery rates were any different than, standard of care, because again, there was no control. And so somewhere along the line in early March, some Silicon Valley guys got onto this story. I forget who was the first, but Elon Musk eventually picked up on it. He's been at the center of some badness during this COVID thing. And then President Trump picked up on it and tweeted how it was a game changer. And then there was that press conference that I'm sure you all saw where he called it a game changer. And as you now know, he's now saying he's taking it. Whether he actually is or not, who knows? But it wouldn't surprise me if he is. The problem is, over that time, even though they aren't really randomized, good randomized double-blind trials, there's starting to be enough lesser studies, such as cohort studies, retrospective data, etc., that has been pretty much universally negative. It's like they aren't even seeing a hint of a signal. Now, that doesn't mean the drug doesn't work, but it does tell you pretty strongly that if it does have an effect, it's probably very modest, and you need a big clinical trial, randomized, controlled, double-blind, placebo-controlled to detect it, and it would probably be a very modest effect if there's any. Personally, I think it doesn't work. That's my gut feeling, but I could be wrong.
Well, why do you think he is still pushing it so much?
That's a good question.
He can't admit to being wrong. That has to be part of it.
That could be part of it. But the thing is, he stayed quiet about it for a while. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of promotion of hydroxychloroquine for a while. Is a couple of weeks at least. I don't recall hearing that much about it over the last couple of weeks until he said he was taking it the other day.
Well, I just wonder if it's because his valet had a positive test, and then he decided that maybe he was exposed.
Maybe he got scared.
He got scared. Yeah. Anyway, who knows? I should have mentioned that if anyone has questions out there, of course we are ready to answer them. And I don't know, Emily, is there anyone who's asked a question?
We do have a good question here, and it's about credible sources and critical thinking. So this person's a teacher, and he says, when I teach students to ensure their sources are credible, they get confused. How can we deal with conflicting information about COVID, even though many of them are coming from credible sources? So the value of vitamin D in the study from Stanford, and then there was a whole Facebook study that was also from Stanford. When I teach students, these issues become difficult.
So this is right on David's line.
This is always a tough. Well, this is a tough one. I mean, first of all, they have to understand that this is, in the case, this is new. We don't, we're learning a lot about the virus, but especially a few weeks ago, there were huge gaps in our knowledge. There still are huge gaps in our knowledge, and whenever there's huge gaps in our knowledge about a topic, there will be disagreement from seemingly credible sources. And especially when it's something so important and so urgent, such as, COVID-19. I mean, credible sources, it can be very hard to tell credible from non-credible sources. I'll give you an example. Those two urgent care center doctors who got out on the camera and produced a YouTube video where they claimed to have done, they were from Bakersfield, as I recall. They claimed to have done a prevalence test. They reported what their percentage of positive coronavirus tests in their practice, and it was very high. And from that, they extrapolated that not only have many more people been infected than commonly thought, but that if that's the case, then the case fatality rate is actually lower than the flu. Now, their numbers were ripped apart quite easily as a biased sample, because it was easy to show that the month before they had been advertising their COVID test in their practice and only really testing people who were symptomatic. So of course there are going to be a lot of positive tests. I think in terms of, you have to look at the source. Are they making overblown claims? Do the claims seem too good to be true? Or another thing I always look for is there appropriate humility, about what we don't know? When you see someone making absolute claims, or very confident claims that they are correct, to me that's a pretty big red flag that they either may not know what they're talking about, or they're just way overselling whatever knowledge or findings they have.
Well, I think another one is sniffing out whether or not they're trying to make money in any way.
Yes, that's a good one too. Definitely. If I always like to say, grifter's going to grift, and that's if they're selling a product
And also, it's important to check multiple sources, right?
Yes,
even
yes.
if you're not sure of the credibility of one source, go check out other sources. And when you see enough sources all saying the same thing, you have an idea that this might be where the truth may lie.
The trouble is that with this particular virus, there's just so much unknown. And whenever science leaves the void, we know what happens, is that the pseudoscience just rushes into to fill it. And I've never come across disease. I mean, I've been looking at diseases for many, many years, reading about them. I've never come across any that was so mysterious and had so many complicating features, so many possible presentations. I mean, just about every day you hear something new about this, right? A week ago, we never heard of kids getting rashes on their feet and on their hands, and now all of a sudden it's all over the place.
And this is what happens as hundreds of thousands or millions of people get the infection. You start seeing you start seeing low frequency complications that weren't noticed before when the caseload was much lower, such as the syndrome in children. And you also, and as you say, we also find out that a lot more of the disease is asymptomatic or weakly symptomatic than originally was thought, because back in the early days there weren't enough tests, and they were only testing people who they strongly suspected had the disease. I mean, to me, the biggest question and kind of the most frightening thing is, even if the case fatality rate is like 0.5%, which on the lower end of the estimates, why do these people get so sick? Like, what is it about the people who get really sick compared to people who just get a mild case or even asymptomatic, and they find out later on a serology test that they have antibodies?
Yeah. But what about the blood clotting factor? I mean, the microthrombi, which again are showing up more and more, right? Now we see the kidney problems caused by that, possible use of aspirin.
Yeah, I mean, it's being debated everywhere. Our hospital is currently, recommending prophylactic anticoagulation for at least the patients who are, moderately to seriously ill with the virus. The recommendations change as evidence comes in. We still don't have a good definitive answer. I expect the recommendations will continue to evolve until there's enough evidence that a consensus can be, reached.
Well, that's actually one of the questions that says, what do patients take when they have COVID? What are they given? And I guess it depends on how it's manifesting in that particular individual.
Yes. I mean, a month or two ago, a lot of COVID patients were getting hydroxychloroquine. Like a lot, that it was on the stand. It towards the end of March, early April, it became a de facto standard of care, even though there was no evidence, which is something that I've, kind of bemoaned about, that like in a crisis, our dedication to evidence-based medicine is not that strong.
What about vitamin D? Or there's significant evidence for that.
I must confess, I haven't really looked at the evidence for that. I'm not real familiar with it, so I don't know if I can do anything other than speculate. So I haven't looked at the studies.
Yeah, well, I mean,
that's a gap in my coronavirus.
I've looked at quite a few of those, and sort of the message seems to be that there is an association. Of course, we're talking association, not cause and effect, but there's an association between very low blood levels of vitamin D and the severity of the disease. That's what I'm seeing. So it's not for people who have mild disease. There doesn't seem to be anything there. But for a serious disease, it becomes more serious if they have low blood levels. But I think also the fact is that taking 1,000 IU of vitamin D is not harmful.
Probably not. I mean, whether it now, of course, the other question is the low vitamin D an indication of something else that makes them, is it rather than an actual cause? That's always the.
Well, talking about low vitamin D, let's talk for a moment about Sweden, because they of course have taken a totally different approach. They're relying on herd immunity, although they did give some advice for distancing, but not as serious as what we have here. But the latest statistics, in fact, that just came out today, their death rate is frightening, and
yes.
The herd immunity that they've been able to achieve is basically they haven't been able to achieve it. They're at something like 1%.
Well, I mean, you have to have like a high percentage of the population having been infected even to get anything near herd immunity. I always worry about a strategy based on herd immunity for the simple reason that the cost is very high, in terms of disease burden, deaths, etc. But it puzzles me that Sweden keeps getting pointed to as an example of a success story, because I don't really think it is.
No, well, the data don't bear out any kind of success so far. I mean, their argument is that yes, they have a very high death rate, but that is going to precipitously drop because the high death rate is because of the exposure that they've allowed. And, well, we'll see.
I get, time will tell. It's kind of interesting, the different experiences in various areas and countries, and it's going to take years before we really know what did and didn't work well. Hopefully by that time we have a vaccine and it's all.
What about the testing? What do you make of the significant number of false negatives?
You mean from which testing? You mean the swabs?
Yeah.
Because if I get that's hard. I'm not sure what to make of that. The tests, for it could be some of it could be an issue of collection, because I don't know if you've ever had a nasopharyngeal swab. It's nasty. They stick it all the way back to the nasopharynx and they twist it around for several seconds to try to get cells. And which is
I hope that's the test that Trump is getting every day.
They should film it.
I actually can't imagine getting that done every day. It would be horrible. But I'm not sure what to make of the low, the fairly high false negative rates. It's a tough one. That's why you probably need more than one test to be sure.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan,
I was just going to say, we're testing all of our surgery patients preoperatively. So they are, it's a requirement before surgery.
Have you operated on any who were positive?
Not that I know of. This requirement started like only 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it's possible I might have operated on someone and not known it. I don't think I have, but.
Jonathan, anything new on the positive negative rates of the testing?
Not that I've seen, but I've also not been paying close enough attention. I would also be a little bit careful, because I'm hearing about this narrative quite a bit on like podcasts and on blogs and news articles. Like this person saying, I was tested once, I was negative, but clearly I had it, and then I was tested again, and I was positive. So I think we also have to be careful, because these stories, they may make it look like, these tests aren't working very well, but of course they are selected stories. And we don't hear about all the times when the test was positive and the person was positive. So I would just put a bit of a damper.
That's what I say about the hydroxychloroquine miracle cure stories.
Right. Yeah.
But maybe we could talk, didn't Health Canada approve, like here in Canada anyway, we have the one that's approved now for the antibody testing, not the diagnostic.
Yeah, that's a different. Yeah.
No, right.
Yeah, we have a number of kits, I believe, that have been approved for for PCR testing. So when you have the virus, the nasal swab, as was described, to detect the actual genetic material of the virus. But now, yes, now there is a kit that will detect antibodies after you've had the virus for a little while. I don't know how it will be used.
Those are two different questions, though. The nasal swab tells you if you have the virus now.
Right.
Yeah.
The antibody test tells you if you've ever been exposed to it or had or had an infection.
I was just wondering if, I know on a lot of my podcasts, they're American, and so they were talking about the antibody testing in the States and, all the false positives that those are giving out. But I didn't hear anything about the ones approved by Health Canada, and I'm curious what their rates are showing. And I don't know.
Well, as we discussed as we discussed on the last live stream, Emily, like the specificity and the sensitivity of that particular kit, as it has been declared by the company itself, is very, very high. So that's reassuring, but there's no independent testing at the moment. Right. What happened in the States, I'm sure that David can chime in on this, is that the FDA basically opened the door to anybody making those kits. They're like, okay, sell them. We won't look at them, just sell them. And now they're rolling this back, saying, hold on a second, because the kits are defective. They're not working very well.
So, some of them, well, it's highly variable. Some of them are very good, and some of them are not. And it's hard to know which is which. It's the whole emergency use authorization. So, there's I had my blood drawn the other day for a seroprevalence test that they're doing in the Detroit and New York area. So I'll find out.
There's a very
test they're using is good. I hope the test they're using is good.
Very scary story today in the New York Times Daily, which is an excellent podcast, comes every day. Mm-hmm. Very scary story about a 15-year-old boy who, ever since school let out, which was in early March, basically has been at home with no significant contact with anyone except going down.
Well, I didn't hear you. Like my screen froze for a couple seconds there.
Okay,
sorry.
This 15-year-old boy who's been home from school since March, and no exposure to anything except going down to the laundry room in their apartment building. And a couple of weeks ago, he spiked a very high fever, started to get a rash on his hands and then on his feet, taken to hospital. He was on the verge of being put on the ventilator. He was in a terrible state. And he had two negative tests.
I believe only the first one was negative. The second one was positive. I just listened to it earlier.
I thought the third one was.
I believe there were only two. I might be mistaken, but anyway.
Anyway, okay. he certainly had a negative test, right? And then eventually it became positive. But what I found interesting about that one is he had been, in fact, been isolated ever since he left school. So this thing was somehow lurking around for a long time. And
he did go to one public area though, or a semi-public area. He said that.
Yeah. But tell me, David, what is your take on touching things? What do you think?
It's kind of interesting. I honestly don't know, especially with the new CDC report from the other day saying that it's not as easy to catch by, from objects as they had previously thought. And I've been meaning to read that report to see what the evidence is that they used to base that conclusion on. But that would be good. That would be good news if true. But it doesn't mean you can't get it from something. It just said it's not as easy as previously thought.
Right. This has been my from the beginning. I think that fomite transmission is not a highly significant way of getting this. I think it has to be a very unusual situation where you have an infected host on some object, and it basically has to have gotten there relatively recently, and then you have to touch it, and then you have to touch your eyes or your nose. I think it's a very unlikely scenario. The trouble is with this disease, you can't rule anything out. You can't say impossible about anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's true. Over the last, 8 to 10 weeks, I've been more aware of fomites and things that are touched by a lot of people than ever before. It's like elevator buttons.
Watching a movie or a TV show now is an entirely different experience when I see how many people are doing things together and touching things and not caring. It's a privileged world that we lived in.
And I would think that touching an elevator button is a low risk situation. I mean, unless someone.
I wasn't taking any chances for a long time.
What about gloves? People are wearing gloves to the grocery store.
Well, I mean, the virus does not get into your system through your skin. So wearing gloves, if you're not changing them a lot, or if you're still like touching things and then touching your face, is not really going to make much of a difference.
Touch your face with a glove as you are with an ungloved hand.
Well, that's what I mean. I think it's a false sense of security. People think it somehow protects them when it's really no different than just having your empty hand, and then as long as you wash and disinfect a lot.
Right.
But what I'm not washing and disinfecting the gloves. It's like
they go to the grocery store and they're wearing gloves when they're touching everything, and then when they've gone through the register, then they take off the gloves and throw them away. That's what I see them doing. But I don't see that that's any different from at that point just using a hand sanitizer. I think it will do the same.
It's not. It probably isn't. Yeah, that's what I've made the same point before. That like I said, the virus doesn't get in through your skin. It gets in through mucous membranes in your nose and mouth or in your eyes. So it's.
What do you think is going to come first, a viable treatment or a vaccine?
That's
place your bets. Place your bets.
Place your bets. Gut reaction, hunch.
Probably a vaccine, because it's hard to treat a viral disease. I'm not impressed with the remdesivir data, and hydroxychloroquine looks like it probably doesn't work.
The remdesivir, in what I haven't seen is mortality changes. I mean,
that's right.
So, yeah, you get maybe 5 days less in the hospital.
I'm underwhelmed with the study, but
I mean, there are large number of drugs that are being tried now, and what I think is interesting is that many of these are based on molecular modeling. And they take a look at the spike protein and see what would fit into pockets, and so there are some interesting drugs there that come up, and those are easier to try because these are all on the market already. So you don't have to go through all of the
safety studies.
Yeah. So
yes, a small molecule inhibitor would be great.
Emily, any more questions out there?
Yes, there are a few. Both touch on pseudoscience a bit. So one says, are all countries and cultures susceptible to bogus pseudoscientific theories, or some more than others? And then the kind of links into it. What is your...
Okay, my screen froze. Screen froze again.
Okay.
Most inopportune time for like the last 15 seconds.
Is everyone susceptible to bogus, pseudoscience theories? Are there some cultures or societies more than others? And then also, what is your current favorite topic, your favorite pseudoscience topic that is not COVID related?
Everybody's susceptible. Everybody. Look at all the doctors and scientists coming out with highly dubious COVID, theories. I don't know if you can ascribe any culture as having more susceptibility than others, but we're all susceptible to this sort of thing, and especially since critical thinking isn't really the default in the human brain. You kind of have to work at it. You have to learn. Now, my favorite non-COVID pseudoscience. It's funny. It seems like I've been writing about COVID forever now because I don't remember the last thing.
I feel like everyone should weigh. Everyone should weigh in on this one. I'm sure you all have.
Hey, let's not forget homeopathy. I mean, that has to rank up there as a favorite.
Well, homeopathy is always fun, but it's.
Has there been a homeopathy COVID link yet?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure there have. Yes.
Oh, and in India, they actually have a ministry of Ayurvedic medicine, and they are recommending arsenic albumum as a homeopathic treatment for COVID. I mean, this is criminal stuff. The wildest one I've seen was just what I wrote about today, MMS for COVID. But so MMS, as you know, is chlorine dioxide. A type of bleach. An industrial sanitizer bleach, otherwise known as the miracle mineral supplement or miracle mineral solution that the Genesis 2 Church, led by Jim Humble, has been selling as a cure for everything. Well, I saw something about a supposed clinical trial in Ecuador where they're using intravenous chlorine dioxide. That was that took it up a step I've never seen before. I've seen them talk about using it orally and by enema, but never intravenously. Well, there have been articles about the fact that this is what prompted Trump to say the nonsense about
MMS.
Yes, that someone had sent him the documentation about MMS, and he was impressed by that. And this is what prompted him to ask the question about using some sort of bleach internally. Yeah, I mean MMS is
disinfectant, bleach, whatever. Yeah. Whenever I say, oh, he was saying about you should use bleach, I'd get all these Trump fans coming back and saying he never said bleach. Okay, he said disinfectant. It's like...
Yeah, we're just about running out of time here, but maybe we can squeeze in one more question.
I'm always double muted now, which is why it takes me a while to come back on. Someone was just asking, here, Dr. Gorski, in Montreal, our numbers have not really been going down compared to certainly not the rest of Canada. The island of Montreal is the same as this first wave was. So she says, with Quebec opening up and Montreal kind of following suit, and today we had beautiful weather and more people are out, and everyone's talking about a second wave. We are not done our first wave yet. So, just asking more about treatment, as in, do you think that we're really going to have to wait for a vaccine to come or another treatment such as with AIDS? How quickly will things get out of hand again? Because they're saying that,
That's really hard to predict. I mean, we have fortunately appear to be kind of on the slow downward trend here in Michigan and Detroit. And I'm, of course, worried that could easily reverse. I guess until there's a vaccine or a very effective treatment, I suspect what will happen is that the case rate will percolate along, fluctuate. There will be outbreaks in some places will be better off, and we'll be chasing this thing as it pops up here or here until there's an effective vaccine or treatment. The population is immunologically naive. Everybody's susceptible. We don't even know for sure if getting the infection gives you long-lasting immunity. It's likely that there's some immunity, but it could be short-lived. We don't know.
What does your crystal ball tell you about sporting events, theaters, concerts? How likely is that?
Not this year, I don't think. I mean, except doing it without fans, sort of thing.
Yeah, this is my fear too. We're looking at a long-term business here, and
I get worried. I'm sorry.
What people don't understand with the vaccine is that even if we have one that's out on the market, it's going to take a long time to know whether it's effective or not. Until,
right, and it'll take a long time to, manufacture millions and millions and millions of doses.
Right, and who is prepared to do that, right? I mean, there are a lot of companies working on it, but when you're talking about billions of doses possibly, and then the decisions about who gets it and who doesn't, so it's. I don't see much light at the end of the tunnel. I hate to say that, but that's the way that.
I think the best we can hope for is that it smolders along at a manageable level. Like, so we don't overwhelm ICUs. We don't, have to go back under a total lockdown again, because it's clearly not going away anytime soon. And
Joe, you asked about sporting events and everything. There is a question here I want to ask about airlines, because airlines are opening up soon. And what do you think the risk will be for airline travel?
I don't plan on flying anywhere before next year at the earliest. I suspect. I mean, you're in an enclosed space, and even if they take out the middle seat, which they said they were going to do but have not, as far as I've seen, or at least most airlines, you're still pretty packed in there. Even masks probably help, but even so,
they're claiming that they've increased the air exchange rate, and I mean they're disinfecting, of course, between every. And I think though what is going to happen is COVID fatigue.
That's already happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are just going to say, okay, I can't live like this. So, it's like being in a prison, although it may be a very comfortable prison, in your own house, and they say, okay, I'm going to take my chances.
Well, there's that, but people also forget there are a lot of people who don't have the luxury of sheltering in place. Most of them, a lot of them are the relatively low-paid people who stock the grocery stores, or who, get the food, who, run the gas stations, etc. So, we are very privileged that we actually can work from home and shelter in place, except when I have to go in to take care of patients. A lot of people don't have that option.
What we're doing here, right? We're sitting in a comfortable place, looking at a screen, and knowing that when we finish here, we can go and have a nice snack and go and watch Netflix. Right. And there are a lot of people, of course, who are not able to do these things.
Yeah.
So it's a new world. It's a new world, and it's not a break.
No, the world has changed.
It is. And it's anyway, I think in our lifetime, well, maybe in Jonathan and Emily's lifetime, it's going to go back to somewhat normalcy. But I think in our lifetime, I think we've seen the good stuff, and I think it's gone.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say that. And Dr. Gorski, I hope we get to see you in Vegas or New York for another conference at some point in the future.
I'll say someday, but it's unlikely to be this year, and it may not be next year.
It probably won't be, but let's hope it's, we have to keep a little positive, I think.
I think more likely we will see you back here, because there will be new stuff that is coming out, and you never know. We just might hit on something that works. They've hit on enough stuff that doesn't work, so the odds are gravitating towards finding something that will work. Anyway,
it's possible, but certainly there hasn't been an effort as enormous as this that I can recall in terms of trying to find vaccines and treatments.
No, there are a lot of brains around the world that are being put to the task here, and maybe one of them will bear fruit. So I don't think it will be intravenous vitamin C at 40 grams a day, which is
vitamin C cures everything. Linus Pauling told us that.
Yeah, it's very good for the economy of the companies that sell it. It cures their problems. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us. And
It was
again,
fun.
and thanks to Emily for doing the excellent work behind the scenes and monitoring all of the questions. And we'll be back with you next week. And there's no question that something new will have come up, both in the pseudoscience and hopefully in the science realm as well.
Thank you.
Until we hope that all the chemistry in your life comes out just right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.